All right, everybody. Thank you so much for taking time to be on here with us tonight. My name is Anderson Clayton. I have the honor of serving as your North Carolina Democratic State Party Chair. We've also got on here with us our first Vice Chair, Jonah Garson, and a few other of our officers and our staff members. So a very big thank you to all the folks who helped put this on. And thank you to all of you, the concerned citizens of North Carolina that understand that North Carolina Democrats have a plan to take back our courts. And that first step happened in last November when Justice Allison won her Supreme Court fight by 734 votes, thanks to the help of each and every single one of you. Which also we saw afterwards, Republicans tried to use North Carolina as the petri dish to be able to take election denialism into every other state. We saw Republicans try for 6 months to challenge voters across our state, people who had been voting in their communities for decades. And we saw the type of attacks that we are planning to see again in 2026, which brings us to why all of you are here tonight. While Republicans launched a 6 months election denial scam, we also saw Republicans in the legislature try to take away powers from our Democratic governor who had just been elected by an overwhelming, the largest margin we had ever seen for North Carolina in a gubernatorial election with a 15-point margin for Governor Josh Stein. We saw Republicans come in the middle of the night and take away powers with Senate Bill 382, powers from our Democratic governor to be able to appoint state board of elections and county boards of elections members across this state. And also what that meant was Senate Bill 382 took away powers from our Democratic Attorney General to be able to sue the state legislature. But tonight we're going to dig into what it means to have a Republican Board of Elections and also what it means to have now challenges to over almost 100,000 voters in the state of North Carolina and their voter registration records. Tonight you're going to learn how you can participate in making sure that folks' voter rolls are corrected and that we're doing everything that we can as a party to reach out to people who may not know that Republicans are trying to challenge and infringe on their rights right now. And honestly, I know no one better to talk to you all about the importance of our courts, the importance of enfranchising people across this state than our speaker tonight, which is our fantastic Supreme Court Justice, Anita Earls, everybody. So if y'all could give her a little clap in the chat box. But Justice Earls, thank you for joining us and giving us some of your time here this evening.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you, Chair Clayton, and thank you to all of you for being here. It's wonderful to see your faces and see so many familiar names. And thank you to the party for hosting this. I just have to start by saying that people should never forget that not only did Justice Riggs and all the groups that work to cure ballots and make sure those votes count made a huge difference to make it possible for her to take the seat that she was duly elected to, but our party stepped up in a big way. The Democratic Party supported Justice Riggs, supported the litigation efforts, and all of you made that possible by supporting the Democratic Party, but without that, they very well could have gotten away with this effort that was underway to throw out all these ballots. And so I am eternally grateful to Anderson and all the leadership of our state party for showing up and taking the really difficult steps of engaging in that litigation and saying, no, we will stand firm. And I think the understanding that we are kind of ground zero in the trenches to protect our democracy across this country is echoed today, right? So Justice Riggs was in Washington, D.C. in front of a Senate, in a Senate hearing, talking about what had happened in her election. And then as we speak, finishing up a segment on MSNBC with Mark Elias, explaining why what has happened in North Carolina is so important and why it's important to the rest of the country. But beyond the problem of what happened in North Carolina possibly being a model for around the country, I think you all know that if we had fair election districts in North Carolina, we would have a House of Representatives at the national level controlled by Democrats. We would have a state House and a state Senate with fair districts that could sustain a veto. We would not have these veto-proof majorities. So I think we all appreciate that having a current court that permits extreme partisan gerrymandering distorts the voices of the people in our democracy at the state and federal levels. But I also want to say a word about the big picture in the sense that our courts really are supposed to be the place that protects our rights. So protects your right to vote, make sure that your vote is counted equally, and the place that is a check and balance on the other branches of government. And so the law that Chair Clayton talked about is being litigated, right? The question of whether or not it was constitutional for the legislature to take the power of the appointing the Board of Elections away from the governor and place it with the state auditor, that a 3-judge panel appointed by Chief Justice Newby ruled that that law is unconstitutional. But then in a process fairly similar to the shadow docket that you may have heard about at the US Supreme Court, the Court of Appeals said, well, we're just going to let that law go into effect anyway. And our court said, yeah, that's fine. Today, we learned the 3 Republican judges at the Court of Appeals who were on that panel, but that said it was okay for this law to go forward. But I think more importantly, so I did write a dissent when our court said that it was okay to allow this law that a lower court has said is against the state constitution, to allow it to go into effect, which meant people lost their jobs. It meant all these new appointments to the state and county boards of elections. And in that dissent, I say very clearly that the people of the state, if they wanted, that when you vote for who has these seats in our Council of State, you're voting for people to carry out the responsibilities of those seats. And so if people wanted Republicans to control the Board of Elections prior to the election, they knew they would have to elect a Republican governor. But that's not what they did. They elected a Democratic governor. And then for the legislature to come in after the fact and switch around the powers of these Council of State offices, in my view, is completely undemocratic and illegitimate. But we are where we are. And what the federal court said very clearly in Justice Riggs' litigation was that while you can't change the rules of the election after the election to change the outcome, you can change them before the next election. And so we now are faced with the prospect of the voters who, in addition to the voters that were challenged, voters who don't have the last 4 of their social or their driver's license number in their registrations, they risk the possibility of their ballots not counting. And I know that's going to be the focus of the efforts this evening, but I also just have to mention those military and overseas voters, because it's clear that they are going to have to show an ID. It's possible there's some guidance being circulated that might say they can vote for the federal level offices, so they can vote for US Senate. So someone overseas, say you have a college student who's going to be an exchange student in the fall of 2026 and living somewhere overseas, but still wants to vote in our November 2026 election. It looks like what the current Board of Elections is proposing is that if they fail to show an acceptable ID, they can still vote for US Senate, but they wouldn't be able to vote. Of their vote cast for, in my race for a state Supreme Court, wouldn't count. So I don't have numbers yet, but I want people to generally know that anyone living overseas voting in 2026 in North Carolina elections has to show an acceptable ID with their ballot. Otherwise, it won't count for the state races. And we definitely know that my race will be very close. Remember that Chief Justice Beasley, when she ran in 2020, she lost by 401 votes. So the 734 was an improvement, but it's not improving as far as we really want it and need it to be. And I, despite knowing that I'm going to work as hard as I possibly can and excited about the top of our ticket, in 2024, 200,000 voters voted for governor and didn't vote for state Supreme Court. So I have to make sure that as much as possible, that everyone who comes out to vote for our amazing US Senate candidate also understands the importance of state Supreme Court and this race. Our court not only has the important responsibility of protecting the right to vote, but I'll just say one other word, and that is about education. If you're concerned about the cutting off of federal funds to our public education systems, to the voucher money being taken out of the system. We also know that our court held up recently the funds that the prior Democratic controlled court said should be spent for public education. They put a halt to that order, still have not ruled. Those funds are still held up. So many important issues: public education, how much you pay for electricity, whether you'll be compensated if you're injured on the job, so many things that affect people's lives, their pocketbooks, their quality of life, is decided by our court. And we need a court that's committed to upholding your rights. So I know you all know that, but I kind of want to give you the language, give you the points to make as you're talking with voters, and encouraging people to understand the importance of their voice being heard in our political process. So I will stop there and turn it back over to Anderson.
Justice Earls, thank you so much. There's no one else, at least that I would want to follow into battle this year to defeat Republicans and make sure that we're protecting everybody's rights across the state than you. And so folks that are listening right now understand exactly what she was talking about with our plan to take back our courts too, right? So 2024 with Justice Riggs's race was step 1. Justice Earls is our step 2. And then 2028, we've got 3 Republican seats up on our Supreme Court, and we are going to be able to reverse partisan racial gerrymandering and give so much power back to the national level for our party, but also for the people of this state, which is extremely important. And so Kat Lawson, who is our voter protection director, is going to walk you all through exactly how we got here, because it can be confusing learning, right, about what's happening with our courts, also what's happening with this lawsuit right now, and what's going on with our state board of elections. And so, Kat, I'm going to turn it over to you, and thank you for joining us tonight and all you're doing to protect the vote across North Carolina this year.
Thanks, Anderson. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. So let's start with the TLDR, the big picture. Next month, about 97,000 North Carolina voters are going to get a piece of mail from the State Board of Elections telling them that their voter registration is invalid. Many of these voters have been voting for years and years, or even decades. And so we are expecting this to be quite a shock. What's even more shocking is that this number started off higher when the state board first launched this initiative. That number started at 103,000. And we'll get into why this is a problematic system. But one of the pieces going on here is that the state board has charged the county boards with doing a whole bunch of administrative stuff. So the numbers of voters who need to do the work that I'm about to talk about, keeps on changing, which is just going to add to the confusion that voters are experiencing. But this is kind of the end point of a very long set of tactics by the Republicans at the national and our state level. So let's talk about what got us to this point of all of these voters having their registrations challenged. So if you've been with us in this fight for a while, you might remember that way back in 2024, which at this point feels like an absolute lifetime ago, the Republican National Committee filed lawsuits around the country in multiple states challenging voter registration files. And they did it on this particular theory, saying that this one federal law required states to maintain voter registration files that included 2 identifying numbers. First, a driver's license or a social security number. And what the RNC started claiming was that anytime that there were gaps in these registration files, that those numbers weren't present, that meant those registrations were invalid, that the voters associated with those registrations were suspect, and that they should either be purged from the system, required to re-register, required to go through extra hurdles, basically, before their vote could be counted. That theory showed up in 2 different lawsuits in our state. It showed up in a state court and it showed up in a federal lawsuit. In both cases, by the time we got to fall of 2024, Republicans were told by judges, look, we'll get to the actual merits of your theory, whether it's true or not, later. But what we do know is that you can't use this theory to throw out voters in 2024, right? You didn't do it soon enough. You waited too long. That's unfair to voters. So we're not going to apply this theory right now. That didn't stop Jefferson Griffin after he lost to Justice Riggs in November and then lost again after 2 recounts. He decided that he was still going to try to say that this theory justified throwing out 60,000 North Carolina voters. And so that launched our 6-month saga of federal court fights and state court fights, trying to make sure that voters did not have their votes thrown out because of a theory that had, 1, already been told didn't apply in 2024, and 2, shouldn't apply at all in a retroactive way to voters who had done what they thought they needed to do by the time they showed up in November of 2024. So after 6 months of all of this back and forth, we finally got to the point in May of this year where Griffin conceded and acknowledged that he lost and Justice Riggs won, right? Something that we had known for months and months at this point. But now, in the wake of that concession, we're seeing that the Republicans are still unwilling to let this theory go. And so shortly after Griffin conceded, the Trump DOJ filed yet another lawsuit against the North Carolina Board of Elections, demanding that it correct the voter files. One of the key things that had changed between those first lawsuits and this Trump DOJ lawsuit was that the control of the state board had been wrongfully passed over to the Republican auditor's office. And so we are now dealing with a state board that for the first time in a decade has a majority control under Republican leadership instead of Democratic leadership. So all of these 3 lawsuits, the 2 from last year and the 1 from this year, are still happening. And so we're still waiting for the courts to say what should happen with all of these votes and what the proper interpretation of the law is. But the fact that these lawsuits still haven't finished and haven't resolved did not stop our newly Republican-controlled state board of elections from deciding it was going to do this process anyway. And so what the state board has now done is it has decided to go ahead with this process of identifying voters whose registration files in North Carolina are either missing a driver's license number or they are missing their social security number in the state board of elections file. Now, one of the things that we are hearing from the state board and one of the things that we learned from all of our lawsuits last year was that the data system that the state board uses is holy, not in a sacred sense, but it has a patchwork of holes like Swiss cheese all the way through it. And so what we heard from the general counsel for the State Board of Elections in submissions that he submitted under oath during the litigation was that there are pockets of data that exist in the state board systems that also exist in the county board systems where maybe these files actually are complete. Maybe actually these voters did do everything that they needed to do. And it's simply instead been a problem of record keeping and maintenance, which is how we end up where we are today. And we can see that those problems showed up even throughout all of these different lawsuits. The lawsuits last year started claiming that 225 voter files didn't have all of their proper numbers. Jefferson Griffin was only able to claim that about 60,000 of these voter records were missing their files. And that was because he focused on only a certain number of counties. And now, even after the Republican-controlled state board has done its own massive review, they still didn't end up at 225,000. They ended up only at 103,000. And that number is already starting to go down. So we have this incredibly unreliable data system that is being used to still support and justify kicking voters off of the voter rolls. And what we're also seeing is that this is not happening in a fair and equitable way across the state. So while you would expect that there would be, really high raw numbers of challenged voters showing up in our most populous counties, Wake, Mecklenburg, Guilford, Durham, Cumberland, and Forsyth, and that's true on a raw number, what you can see in this map is that the actual impact in terms of the proportion of registered voters per county is that this decision is hitting our rural counties, our eastern counties particularly hard. And what we're also seeing in the data is that it's hitting our communities of color very hard. So the overall number of challenge registration files amounts to 3% of all Black voters in the state are on this list. 3% of all Latino voters in the state are on this list. 2% of AAPI voters in the state are on this list. And in contrast, only 1% of the white voters in this state are on this list. And what that ends up meaning in terms of the felt impact on our voters in North Carolina is that Black voters are 3 times more likely to be on this list than a white voter. You would not expect that in a state where white registered voters outnumber Black registered voters and outnumber voters of color in our state. If this is a thing that were equitably distributed, we would expect to see, numbers that roughly matched the numbers of how many people are registered. But that's not what we're seeing. So what we're seeing is a decision that is being justified based on bad data, that is being pushed forward despite no court telling the board that it had to do this. And we're seeing an impact that is going to be most felt by our poor voters and by our voters of color around this state. And so My professional job, I like to joke, is I'm here to bum you out and then tell you what we're going to do. And so that's the bum you out part, right? That's the here's the bad situation we find ourselves in. But we do have plans about what we're going to be doing. And here's what the state board has decided it's also going to do. So first of all, you can go check for yourself whether you are on this list. The State Board of Elections staff, who remains incredibly hardworking, and many of the staff are still nonpartisan appointees for now, they've created a website. And so you can go to ncsbe.gov/registration repair, and you will be able to look up and see who is on this list. Are you on this list? Are your neighbors on this list? Are there people that you know in your life who are on the Griffin list and you want to see if they're still in trouble? You can search for that on this website. And so folks can go and find right there whether or not their voter registration file has been flagged. If somebody is on this list, they are being given 3 options to repair, in the state board's terms, to repair their voter registration file. So voters can either go to the DMV portal and they can go through the process of updating it through the DMV. They are going to receive a letter from the state board in August with a form that they can return to their county boards of elections, or folks can go in person to their county board of elections with their driver's license or their social security card and fix these things in person. There are pros and cons to all of these options, right? The online DMV portal is not great. I don't know the last time y'all renewed your registration, but it's a little clunky, right? It's a chat bot. It's not super helpful. You need to have a really strong internet connection for it to not time out and kick you out of the platform. And so not everybody is going to be able to access that system well. And also, accessing the DMV portal relies on you having a driver's license. So if you do not have a driver's license or a state ID, you won't be able to use this tool. Hopefully, most people are still living at the address that is associated with their registration file, and they will receive the letter from the state board. If anybody has moved, if the post office is not super reliable in their area, people might not get that letter. And so we are still waiting on our public information request to see the letter. We will share that with y'all so that everybody knows what it looks like and what it entails. But folks should be able to keep an eye out for that. And we'll talk about how we're going to let people on this list know that that letter is coming to them so that it doesn't get flagged as junk mail. And then most likely the most reliable way of repairing this registration issue is going to be to go in person to a county board of election and to handle it in person with somebody that a voter can talk to and actually interact with. That requires transportation and time, which we know that a lot of folks don't always have. So this is the universe of imperfect solutions that we are dealing with that the state board has approved. And here's why this repair process, why this voter defense work that we're asking you all to join us in is so incredibly important. Here's what we know is going to happen to voters in October and November of this year if they show up to vote without having gone through one of these 3 processes. They are going to be required to cast a provisional ballot. Even if they show up during early voting and asked to update their voter registration the same day, they are going to be told that they must instead cast a provisional ballot. And so a provisional ballot has on it fill in the blank parts that will require the voter to say, here's my driver's license number or my social security number. And then what happens with that provisional ballot is it gets put in a pile with other provisional ballots. County Board of Election staff then go through those provisional ballots and they check whether or not the data matches up with the database that they have and whether or not they are able to essentially confirm that that is a real person using their real identity when they cast that ballot. Then the stack of approved provisional ballots from the staff goes to the County Board of Elections members, who then vote on saying, yes, staff has told us that these provisional ballots are okay, therefore we are now going to count them. In a best case scenario, right, with the most good faith people working, mistakes happen. That's part of how we know we ended up in this situation in the first place. And so we are not able to guarantee for voters that the process that should happen to result in their provisional ballot being counted is actually going to happen. And that's when we assume that everything works well and that everybody acts in good faith. We don't know yet how these newly Republican-controlled county boards of elections are going to act. We don't know what pushback they're going to give to their staff, what questions they're going to ask that staff are not prepared for. And so you will hear from me later on in the coming months about our needs to monitor these county board decision makers. But that is the challenge that we're facing. And so this is why we don't want voters to show up in October, in November, either this year or next year, and for the first time find out that they have to cast a provisional ballot. And so here's how we're going to go about reaching out to folks and talking to them and educating them. So the first thing that we're going to do, the second that we get the timeline for when the state board is sending these letters and when we have the actual copy of the file that is being sent, we're going to be texting every voter on the list, telling them, hey, you're about to receive this piece of mail. Don't throw it out. Here's why it matters. And so we're going to have that text campaign. Starting next week, we're going to have our phone banks where we have volunteers calling all of these impacted voters that we've identified that we can reach and tell and walk them through, again, here's what's happening. Did you know about this? Here's what you can do. What's your plan? And help guide them through the process of responding to this information. And then once we finish up all that phone banking in August and we know then who is still on this list from the state board, we're going to start asking you all who are local to North Carolina to start canvassing and going door to door and reaching folks directly. And so here's why we're asking you all to join us in this effort. So first of all, we really want this and need this to be a unified effort. The list that we're dealing with is changing daily. And so by working together in lockstep, we're making sure that we're able to consistently update that list. It also means that we're able to make sure that the scripts we're using, the information we're giving to voters is updated. For a while, for example, we thought that it might be possible for voters to simply submit a new voter registration file and that would be a good enough way for them to get this corrected. After talking to the state board and getting advice from them, they told us that no. Simply updating an updated voter registration form is actually not going to be a good way to make sure this gets resolved, because for a lot of counties, they might treat that updated voter registration form as simply a duplicate entry, and they might not actually go in and check to make sure that it is one of the folks on this list. They might simply say, it's a duplicate. We're setting it aside. We don't need to do anything with it. It's the same reason that people are not going to be allowed to update their voter registration during early voting and will still be required to vote a provisional ballot. And so we want to make sure that we're all working together so that we can ask those questions and get the information to all of you and get the information to voters at the same time, and that we're not needing to backtrack in case bad information has gotten out. We're also making sure that we're sharing the data, not only to make sure that we're refreshing the list that we're using and that it's constantly kept up to date, but also to make sure that, like, hey, if voters are giving us feedback, right? If they're talking back to us and saying, I thought I took care of this already, what's going on? We're able to then say, well, as of today's list, you're still on, like, you're still here. You haven't been marked as having repaired it. And so having that shared feedback loop means that anytime there are problems that voters are experiencing or information we're getting from how county boards are handling it, we're able to immediately jump into action in a unified way and make sure that this is something that gets resolved as quickly as possible. And so this is all the strategy. I'm going to be sticking around for Q&As later, and to tell you more about how you can sign up in order to do this outreach and do this work, I'm going to bring back again Becca Zirkin. Or bring back for the first time, Becca.
Thanks, Kat. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. You've heard the plan from Kat. We have shown before what we can accomplish with our volunteer power, and so now it is time for us to do it again. As Kat said, we're going to work in a unified, strategic way to reach out to impacted voters by phone. We will update the call list before each phone bank so you're not calling people who already repaired their files. And our phone banks will start August 7th, and they will continue multiple times a week throughout the month. You do not need any prior knowledge or experience to do this. When you show up to the phone bank, we'll train you, we'll tell you what to do. And then in September, it'll be time to knock doors. We will let you know when that time comes, and we're going to need all hands on deck for that too. So we know the margins are small in North Carolina, and so helping these voters repair their voter files it could make all the difference in flipping a town council seat this year and also holding a Supreme Court justice's seat next year. So we really want to get to work now. The link is in the chat, and I thank you so much for your help. And Anderson, I pass it back to you now for some Q&A.
Thank you all so much again for being on here tonight. I hope you got a lot more information maybe than you expected to from Kat, and also that you feel confident now in talking with other folks about what's going on with our courts, but also what's happening with voter registration across the state of North Carolina. We're going to open it up now to you all for a Q&A. So if you want to type your questions in the chat box, and I'm going to throw them out to our fantastic Supreme Court Justice and our voter protection director. This asks, and Becca, maybe some of these questions might be for you as well. What is the plan for overseas and military voters that may be on this list? And anybody can take it if y'all would like to.
So if we have their contact info, they will hear from us. That's the short answer.
This person said, I won't be able to canvass due to ortho issues. I hope I can help in some other way. That is text banking, phone banking, anything that you can do from your home. Becca, Aaron Soto asked if there was a list that we could get by county and by precinct in the state. Is that possible to do with the list of voters that we have from the State Board of Elections?
Well, Kat, you can jump in if you want, but we're going to be using a unified list because we're going to be updating that list for which voters have already repaired their files. So we're going to run that all centrally. And then once we finish with our month of phone banks, then we'll be able to work with the counties to do separate lists for each county out of Vote Builder.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So we want to make sure that everybody who can be contacted through text and phone is helped kind of first to get that list a little bit more manageable for all of our counties. Again, especially looking at where a lot of these folks are. But once we hit September, absolutely, we will be creating lists and helping set up canvassing plans based on county and precinct.
And Anderson, if I can, I just want to answer a question about texting that's relevant here. We're going to text as soon as we know when those letters are going out, and that's going to happen centrally through NCDP. It's not going to be a volunteer effort. We're just going to send that out, and the volunteer effort starts with the phone banking on August 2nd.
Thanks, Becca. Will this presentation be shared?
Yes, it will.
I'm trying to see any other good questions. Becca, if you see any too, feel free. This chat box is going, to be honest with y'all, and I love it.
I can hop in, Chair Clayton.
Well, we have an example mail out to show folks that what they get in the mail.
Yes, we are still waiting for the state board to give that to us, but the second that we have that, it'll be in the script for the phone banking and it will be in the text that goes out to everyone, and we'll share it kind of amongst the folks who are volunteering so that everybody knows what it looks like. And just so that folks know, again, this will be in your scripts, but if folks are asking you, the state board is the entity that's going to be sending this mailing, and it will include a letter, a form to fill out or something. We're kind of, again, waiting to hear what that's going to be, but it will include a stamped addressed envelope to the voters' county board of elections. So if they don't throw it out and think it's junk mail, it should work pretty well for the voters. And Anderson, I'm seeing a bunch of questions in here about some of the legislation that made it through the House today and other things going on. So tonight is not a huge night to update y'all on the various things happening over in the House and Senate. But yes, there is proposed legislation to do a lot of things in election law. We've also been told there's going to be yet another omnibus elections bill coming later on. The one that was introduced and voted on in the House today is kind of a mixed bag. On the one hand, it kind of gives us more time to do administrative vote counting and chase and cure. On the other hand, it makes multiple positions at the state board partisan positions explicitly. It creates a $1.5 million slush fund so that the state board can elect outside counsel instead of relying on DOJ to represent it. So we are keeping tabs on how it's going and what's happening. But one thing that it does include that I do think everybody agrees on is that it has $15 million in it to update the data management system for the state board, which, again, if you've been following this saga, tells you just how much that system needs to be updated if our Republicans are actually willing to spend that kind of money on it.
Jack said lots of information to absorb and spread to others. We need a summary of background info and actions, and CDP is requesting of volunteers. Our digital team is going to make sure that we're making sort of graphics that we're going to have in our content package that will go out about this, but we can definitely have Jack a one pager, and hopefully that the presentation afterwards is also helpful for folks to look back through after this. And then
Anderson, I see a question that I think is for Kat. Is this the same info we used during the Griffin fight? Is it a subset? People who were paired already, should they expect that they're not on this list? And how is it different from the HAVA process in the last election? That's all.
Yeah.
Questions.
So there is likely overlap, but it's not perfect. So Griffin didn't challenge this category of voters everywhere in the state, right? He cherry picked voters from the counties that he thought were probably mostly Democratic, because it was never about the principle. It was about him trying to steal an election. And so there are more voters now on this list than there were on his. And so it is worth it for everybody who's on that list to check here again, to see if the state board has resolved their issue during its own administrative process or if they're still here. But there's going to be different language that we use in explaining to voters how they ended up on this list.
there is a question in the chat box that Andrew answered, but I think it is worth repeating. Angela says, reading that the DMV is allowing driver's licenses to be expired for 2 years, but for voting, the license cannot be expired more than 12 months to be a valid ID. And Andrew answers it. The expiration extension for driver's licenses is for driving only. You need an unexpired ID for voting. The ID for voting, though, does not have to, the address on your ID does not have to necessarily match the one that you are registered to vote at, though. It is just a photo ID to verify who you are as a person. And that's important. And you do not need a real ID to vote, which is the other ID that's come out with a star on it that you have to fly. So the expired ID only counts for driving, the star ID only counts for flying, and you just need a valid ID that shows who you are to go in and vote.
Yeah. And one more piece of nuance there. If you are over the age of 65, you are allowed to use an expired driver's license if it expired within a year of your 65th birthday. That is the other exception to using it as a photo ID when you go and vote. The bill from today did potentially allow for the expired ID to be used for like this next cycle. So again, we're keeping tabs on it. You all will hear more this fall once we get into our Election Law 101 sessions again.
And Linda, yes, we welcome unaffiliateds to volunteer with our party. We say Dems and friends all the time. So y'all forward it around to your friends and also to anybody else that cares about democracy and helping make sure people get out and vote. Pam also put in the chat box, the DMV is crazy right now. It is hard to get an ID. So if you are someone that does not have one, or you're going to drive with that expired one, you can get a free identification card at your local board of elections that will also and only can be counted to go in and vote with.
I see a question. If a voter cures their voter registration now, will they stay cured for future elections like 2026, as long as they otherwise stay eligible?
So if nothing else changes, yes, this should resolve it.
Robert said, I'm an elections poll worker and a former county BOE member. Should I contact the local BOE or the local Dem party to assist in this effort?
Can sign up with us. And then once we make it down to your actual county, your county chair and all of those folks will know how to do the in-person work. And also thank you very much for all of your work and service.
And Julie, Andrew answers this too. How can we access this recording to send to friends? It's going to be on our YouTube channel. You'll also get a wrap-up email after this with all of the information within it.
I know that there's a little bit of a lag on the mobilize for some folks. I think it's because over 150 people have already signed up from this call, and it might be slowing down the site some. So good problem.
Good work, everybody.
Pam asked, any chance the NCBOE will return to Democratic control? Kat, you want to take that one?
I am not optimistic, no. Not until we actually take back our General Assembly and take back our court. Like at the end of the day, what we're seeing is a theory of power that simply says, well, the General Assembly gets to reallocate power that otherwise should belong to the governor to whoever they want. And they're just going to keep on playing hopscotch like this, right? If we win the auditor's office in 2026, they will just move it to whatever council of state a Republican won, no matter how absurd or ridiculous it is. And so that is why the long-term plan that we've been talking about, why what Justice Earls was emphasizing is so incredibly important. Laws and the work that we do on this front are necessary and they are good. But at the end of the day, democracy depends on us persuading enough people to win votes and win elections. And so we have to preserve Justice Earls' seat on that court in 2026. We need to flip more seats in our General Assembly in 26, again in 28, take back our court in 28, and keep on doing the long-term work of getting a democratic government back.
I still don't understand the status of the litigation against the change to Republicans for supervising voters. Is it still pending, Kat?
So if I think I understand that question correctly, so there are 3 lawsuits. There's one in state court that started last year. It's called Kivett 2. There's one in federal court that started last year. That's the RNC. And there is a 3rd lawsuit that the Trump DOJ filed against the state board this year. All of them are still kind of ongoing. There have been interventions by the DNC and by other groups into all of them. The ones from this spring are still in process, but essentially they're still in flux. They're just kind of in the quiet zone of negotiations and discovery. When there are updates, we will absolutely tell you.
And then Justice Earls, do you want to comment at all on or how that has made it through your courts and maybe through the Court of Appeals right now? Because obviously with Senate Bill 382, what happened when the auditor's office obviously took control of the State Board of Elections and Republicans in our legislature gave that, the governor and the AG both sued over their rights being taken away in that lawsuit. Oh, and Justice Earls, you're muted if you're talking. Oh, and they can't unmute. Will someone unmute Justice Earls? There we go.
Okay, sorry. So yes, so the other lawsuit is about whether or not the governor or the state auditor should control the Board of Elections. And the current status of that is that a 3-judge trial court said that's unconstitutional. And then the Court of Appeals said, that's okay, we're going to go forward anyway while we consider the appeal. So the appeal, and then our court, the governor came to our court and said, wait a minute, we don't want you to put in place an unconstitutional law. Here are the appeals first. And our court said, no, it's fine, go forward. So that case is pending in the Court of Appeals. It may or may not be decided ultimately by our court because the General Assembly in its wisdom said that you no longer have the right of appeal if there's a dissent in the Court of Appeals. So that concentrates power in the hands of Republicans. There are just so many ways in which the General Assembly has changed our state government. And one of the ways is taking away your right to appeal. So bottom line, the appeal is pending. It could come to our court or it may not. But understand that our court has already issued opinions in which the Chief Justice has put forward this philosophy that the legislature is supreme. And our court has no power to really put any brakes on the legislature. So that's the current theory of your Supreme Court. So that's why I say if you're talking to voters and they want checks and balances, they're going to need people on the court who believe in the importance of checks and balances.
And we all on this call know the difference between a Republican-dominated Supreme Court and what they're willing to do to disenfranchise our rights, and also a Democratic court that cares about enfranchising and helping people across this state have access to things like free and fair public education and also free and fair elections in their backyards. So I think that's everything that I got in the chat box. And if we didn't, we'll make sure that we follow up with you all. But thank you to the 500 plus folks that joined us tonight that care about your democracy. And next time we do one of these big Zooms, we're going to make it 1,000. And I'm really excited. So you're going to grab a friend and bring them on here too the next time that we're all phone banking together. Thank you to Kat. Thank you to Becca for helping organize this. Justice Earls, thank you for everything that you do each and every day on a court that right now is 5-2 in a Democratic minority. We appreciate you for dealing with the folks that you do, and to our staff tonight for helping make this possible. I really appreciate it. And to all of you, thank you for being on, and we'll see you all on here soon. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.